if you value it just as a perp dex, I think it's pretty fairly valued. But if you value it as a layer one, right, and all of the growth and network effects that can have, we think, yeah, it should be where Solana is, definitely. It makes me think of Ethereum in 2018, at around like 85 to $100, to Ethereum in 2020 at $3,000.
I also don't want to corner you into being, hey, there's a 10x here in Hyperliquid or something like that still on the table. But those numbers seem to be the midpoint of what you're talking about here.
I think the math checks out, Zach.
All right, the CEO of Hyperion DeFi, Hyunsu Jung, thank you so much for being on, man.
Hey, Zach, thanks so much for having me.
It's an exciting time just because of what we're seeing out of Hype right now. There's a lot of crypto that is taken on the chin to start the year, but Hype's momentum carrying over into 2026, and a lot to celebrate, obviously, in 2025 and look ahead to in 26. But why don't we just kind of start with why you think Hype has been breaking from the pack, the biggest thing that makes it stand out from almost all the other crypto projects we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think Hyperliquid has finally broken into an understanding more broadly that it's not just a crypto token, or it shouldn't be grouped into just the general crypto digital asset class. It is a pure next generation financial services product, which means that now for users globally, you're now able to just trade crypto, but also access equities, commodities, FX. And now with the HIP-4 upgrade, outcomes-based markets like prediction markets, which means that it really is becoming the blockchain to service all financial products. And we think that is why it's being able to decouple from the performance of other digital assets very significantly.
Yeah, for one, I mean, obviously, there's two things to maybe discuss too, and you being the CEO of one of the few, I guess, Hyperliquid DATs that are out there. Two things to discuss. One, kind of the idea of a Hyperliquid DAT being different than a lot of these other DATs, seeing as it's a little bit trickier to maybe access Hyperliquid as a traditional investor, institution, I should say, here in the US. And then the other piece being Hyperliquid itself and the token and what the project is doing being distinct from a lot of other things, and the buy and burn, which we can get into. But I think that might be, from our position in covering all this, why it's one of the few cryptos up in 26. And I guess, the theory that we heard last time in round one, as we've been profiling all the top crypto projects with various guests, and we chatted with Hyperliquid Strategies, another Hyperliquid DAT. It's basically very simple, is that Hyperliquid is the beast that's eating all of the other kind of places to trade, and then also expanding its technology into new markets. I mean, how do you kind of break down why there's this inflection point right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of valuable components to it. In terms of generally call it Hyperliquid stickiness, you saw last year, especially in Q4, there was a lot of questions about new competitors like Aster and Lighter. And then what we came to see after was the fundamentals and the metrics showcase that Hyperliquid is extremely sticky. People want to trade on not just Hyperliquid's core platform, but also on the HIP-3 markets. I think in the first couple of weeks of January, it also got to the around 10% of all of Hypercore's volumes, which is really significant for a product that's only been launched about 4 months ago. So good product, strong user base. It's providing access to many kind of different financial primitives. And we think liquidity begets liquidity. And that is really what, again, allows Hyperliquid to differentiate itself significantly from other perp dexes, but also crypto-based projects as a whole. And then I can speak to a little bit more about why Hyperion saw it very valuable as a treasury asset.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in terms of the competition, that was what we've been digging into, because Lighter with their token launch and kind of trying to catch up best they can. It's very interesting as Hyperliquid and Lighter are paired in our crypto project of the year kind of series round two, so people will be able to vote on which one advances here. But I think it's also worth digging into, because it's not really apples to apples when it comes to building Hyperliquid the way that they've been building as their own kind of ecosystem, blockchain, and technology, versus the idea of Lighter being built on top of Ethereum. So kind of very different approaches being built here. But on top of that, as you mentioned, like kind of scaling access and the way that people are using Hyperliquid, the other big news is Ripple also adding it in terms of their integrations in Ripple Prime. I don't know if there's anything to speak to there around kind of what that adds, but certainly I think that that's part of the roadmap. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. We think that it's a huge cosign to have a major player like Ripple Prime offer Hyperliquid to a lot of its institutional partners. I think it opens the door for a lot more, I would say, friendly competition, more access tighter liquidity, just better. The more meaningful entities that are trading on Hyperliquid, it means that everything about the product can become better, right? Retail and institutional. And so we think it's a great cosign. We think that it is only going to accelerate the reach that Hyperliquid has. And we, as Hyperion DeFi, are going to be better positioned for it because we are also building products and different, services like markets that are able to be used by these players as they come onto Hyperliquid.
As you kind of like project out, this is always the tricky thing for projects who come on here, or in your case, a DAT CEO who comes on here, because it's a little bit tricky to kind of have insight into this. But I think obviously the big rallying cry for Hyperliquid breaking from the pack has been the idea of how much revenue has been stacked up by the actual project on chain, which in today's market matters quite a bit, and also what you do with that revenue. And you guys, in your guys' note to shareholders, had kind of highlighted a bit of that in terms of how much had been purchased in 2025. I think it was like 97% of those revenues going to the buy and burn to remove 13% of the supply by the end of 2025, circulating supply. I mean, when you look ahead to 2026, do you guys kind of model out what you might be expecting for this year?
Yeah, I mean, generally we try to have a pulse on where it's headed. I think in September of 2025, we were peaking at around $2.5 to $3.5 million per day, which annualized to a little bit over $1 billion in revenue. We're call it in a bear market, for lack of a better term, and Hyperliquid is doing around $2 to $2.5 million per day. So we continue that run rate at today's prices. We think that the supply demand mechanism is really going to start to take effect as more and more demand sinks are built out on Hyperliquid. In addition to the supply slowly being eaten up, right? The lower that the price of hype actually is, and you're still doing the same amount of fees or more, the more hype is taken off the market constantly. And so, from the two verticals that Hyperion DeFi effectively looks at, from the treasury asset side, right, you have a structural tailwind that simply does not exist in any other blockchain asset. And zooming out, if you look at Ethereum, Solana, and Bitcoin, which are the majors, now you're starting to see the effects of like who is the next marginal buyer, what is the product they're offering, and how does it actually support the treasury asset. The second vertical is if you are a digital asset treasury, how are you using that token to organically and directly contribute to the ecosystem's growth? It's very challenging to do because Solana, you can stake it and you can be a validator, you can provide it into various DeFi protocols, but it's not, I think, moving the needle significantly in the way that Hyperion is, with directly integrating and using protocols, making sure that it's institutional grade, and then offering them to other players. And so, as that ecosystem of Hyperliquid, which is still very young, starts to accelerate, I think that scaling mechanism is going to be really, really powerful as the core PerpDex product continues to become more adopted and utilized, which generates more fees, which generates more buybacks.
Is that the main reason why you think we're seeing this kind of rotation into hype right now? Because it's almost as if like, directionally the way that people, specifically institutional investors, may want to allocate to the idea of growth in volatility and periods of volatility. Usually, if it was a sex, you might see a bunch of trading volume go up. And Coinbases of the worlds, the Krakens, the Geminis may benefit from that. But for hype, it's twofold, because you guys also, and I say you guys, catch-all term here, but also adding kind of silver and all these other markets now added into Hyperliquid as well. I don't know if there were any takeaways for you, because it was kind of interesting to see non-crypto people on the timeline waking up to, hey, wait a minute, I can trade silver like even on the weekend over here, and seeing that like traders move over. So were there any kind of like early takeaways from what we've seen in metals mania?
I mean, when we first started talking about this, I had ideated Hyperion DeFi back in like January of 2025. When we really launched this back in June, my main pitch or objective was when the HIP3 comes out, we want to have at least 1 million hype so that we can launch a market. We think that's going to be a paradigm shift in terms of how you can be an on-chain business built on top of Hyperliquid that generates revenues agnostic to the price of hype. Fast forward to now, and it's happening. We did not even expect to see the scale of gold and silver, how much percentage of the total global volume was going to be done on Hyperliquid. And then to see people like Michael Burry, AB Campbell talking about, oh, Hyperliquid silver trading is pretty liquid. I can put some size to this and it works well. Paradigm shift, really clear breakthrough. And I think that's what has a lot of people's attention. And then when you look at it from the investor side, and I was at $1 billion asset management before this, where we were very heavy in Ethereum, right, involved in the proof of stake after the merge, and like running validator operations, you have to look at what are the strategies that contribute to each ecosystem and what makes it successful. From the liquid fund side, you have to look at the landscape of everything that's in crypto and say, why does the token have value? Does it even accrue value to the token? And why should I hold it? I think that's why you're seeing such a rotation of capital into the Hype token. And again, the fundamentals are significantly better than they were at any point, I think, in the history of Hyperliquid. And so that makes a lot of sense to us, and we expect that to continue to accelerate.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too. I guess personally, around your kind of rotation into being the CEO of Hyperion DeFi and kind of running a DAT built around Hyperliquid, because obviously each person who's been running these kind of has their own path to landing there. But for you, was it kind of like, all right, like you said, came from ETHLand and kind of what can be done over there? Was there something else unique? Because from the outside looking in, it seems like Jeff and the squad are kind of like dedicated to really kind of growing this out in a way that's different. You and I were talking before the recording. There aren't a lot of kind of Harvard crypto founders out there, though we have seen a lot of MIT representation among some of the big projects. I'm kind of curious, what kind of led you specifically here?
A multitude of factors. Hyperliquid is very important to me in terms of the ethos, in terms of the people that are behind it, the community, what it's been able to build, and how it changed the paradigm in terms of this is how value can be reattributed to the token. This is what happens when you build a great product that is blockchain native, and how excited people are about it. My career in digital assets has been mostly about building ecosystems, right? So been involved in Ethereum very personally for a long time, since 2017. DeFi summer really showcased that financial services could be purely permissionless. And then while I was also at Dharma, we deployed around $300 million of Filecoin into the global data center ecosystem. So over 50 data center teams globally. We provided the use of Phil for them to onboard data. This was before the AI boom, but we were able to see, okay, if a token has utility, there was a lot of demand for it, and we can build good products. Obviously, the challenge with Filecoin compared to Hyperliquid is commercialization, or the ability to generate significant revenues. When I saw what Hyperliquid is capable of, I said, okay, if we build this the right way, Hyperion DeFi can basically have two tailwinds. Not only is it holding what we believe to be the best digital asset on its balance sheet, but also it is going to be able to build scalable revenue generating business lines that are tied to the value of Hyperliquid and also agnostic to the price of Hype. And I think that's something that you don't see very often. And it was the perfect opportunity. And it was really an important thing for me to work on, because I want Hyperliquid to succeed and the ecosystem to succeed. And Hyperion DeFi also succeeds in doing so.
Yeah, there's a couple questions there too, and I want to get into kind of your take on where this can go, because clearly if you have buybacks and burns and growing activity and everything, I am kind of curious to kind of get your take as a CEO leading a DAT here, kind of where Hyperliquid could go, the token itself in 2026 and beyond. But I also going back to kind of this lighter Hyperliquid matchup, we were talking with both teams, and I'm curious too, because lighter seems to be chasing this other model more akin to Robinhood around kind of free trading, no fees on what they've done. Versus kind of what you guys have built on the Hyperliquid side. So I'm kind of curious, in your eyes, the distinction to be made in this friendly competition we call Crypto Project of the Year between Lighter and Hyperliquid, to distinguish between the two.
Just broadly speaking, I have immense respect for builders and entrepreneurs. It's not easy to build a brand new product, to gain a community, to take risks, and often be ridiculed by those that are just happy to sit on a keyboard and say, oh, this is all the reasons why your product is not as good as this other product. I think Vlad and their team have built a very, very good exchange. And I've talked to a lot of traders, institutional users, and there are a lot of valuable components to Lighter, right? It's got the ZK, it's much lower fees. It's built on top of the Ethereum stack. Great product. I think Hyperliquid is better, right? It's got huge community alignment. They gave a lot of the whatever 30% plus the token share to their community. They're buying back all the tokens. They're not using any of the revenues for themselves. They have, I think that what they've built with the synergy between Hypercore and Hyper EVM is a really, really great primitive, because you are then able to port funds between the two verticals and access, your simple financial services like borrow and lending and swap, but also run really great positionings with equities, commodities, and FX. So it's really just about it's not about like tribal war between various digital factions, right? Also have immense respect for Ethereum and Solana. Everything paved the way, and it is what has allowed the building blocks of blockchain and DeFi to continue to improve as quickly as they have. So I think all of it has led to this, but Hyperliquid, I think, is going to be one of the final forms of how blockchain-based services will become extremely valuable and utilized globally. And so, kind of tying that into your question about future value, people love to throw out numbers. I like
Yeah.
to just think more about, very clear structural supply and demand. Supply is diminishing day by day. I think Hyperliquid is one of, if not the only deflationary blockchain product today, and the demand for it keeps growing. So the fact that it's decoupling from crypto at a time where, you know, Bitcoin and Ethereum are I think objectively looking pretty bad in terms of the price action. It's going to be a thing where if strength does return to the majors, Hype should be one of the outperformers. At least that's our outlook, and it's because it has fundamentals that back it, and it makes a lot of sense to investors both in TradFi and in DeFi.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess coming from, a traditional kind of investor lens background, like looking at TAMs, looking at kind of how you try and, it's rare because you can't actually, I guess, kind of have a DCF. There's a lot of things where it's like there's no way to model this because there's no revenue. That had been kind of like the knock on crypto projects for forever until people kind of woke up to like, hey, wait a minute, there might be fees and transaction revenue you can have here. And then, the growth in Hype had kind of caught a lot of people by surprise. I feel like a lot of people are still waking up to all of this happening. But I mean, like when you look through that lens and you kind of put the pieces together, is there kind of like, okay, if this continues, here's like our expectation as a Hyperliquid DAT, here's like our price level? Because almost, every leader of a DAT has to maybe start to think about that. And certainly, I'm sure some of them, ETH DATs, are taking a look at what's fair value right now.
Yeah, so I'll actually provide a little bit of color on Hyperion and what we're doing, right? So in the past 6 or 7 months, we've built 5 different vertical lines directly tied to Hyperliquid. So that includes our validator, it includes DeFi monetization, which is the deployment of markets, for example, like HIP3, or our proprietary Hype Asset Use Service product, which is for fee reductions for institutional clients. We are also doing volatility-based strategies using staked Hype, which is a great novel primitive that we did at Dharma Capital. And we also are engaged in like ecosystem rewards, which is like using the different protocols like Kinetic. We recently announced a partnership with Risk yesterday, which is an options volatility protocol built native to the Hyper EVM. And so we're able to use all of these different products built or native to Hyperliquid, generate additional revenues on top of staking, and then are also able to earn token exposure or governance exposure to other protocols. So what Hype D or Hyperion DeFi shares become is for retail and institutional investors to not only get the access to Hype token, but also the revenue generated products and the valuable components of Hyperliquid. And we think it's like a full stack, all in one vehicle. And we think that there is going to be a lot of value there because when most investors look at the digital asset space, previously, they're like, okay, I'm going to buy the major or I'm going to buy some of the beta tokens because they're usually going to be a lot more reflexive, right? Maybe they'll move, with a little bit more acceleration compared to the major token,
Mhm.
or I can just build a portfolio. If you look at the trend, I believe most people that have done that strategy were not able to. It's very challenging to select those products, especially if they can't generate revenue. Hyperion DeFi kind of solves for all of that because you get the value of Hype, you get the value of other protocols that we are directly partnered with, and also the revenue generating businesses. And so you combine that with Hyperliquid's trajectory, right? So if you value it just as a perp dex, I think it's pretty fairly valued. But if you value it as a layer one, right, and all of the growth and network effects that can have, we think, yeah, it should be where Solana is, definitely. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. And then could it catch up to Binance? I mean, I see a world where that's possible. So those would be kind of like the two initial milestones in terms of where we think Hyperliquid can grow to. And just in that scaling effect, right, as we get to those levels, Hyperion DeFi, our businesses also scale that much. It makes me think of Ethereum in 2018, at around like 85 to $100 to Ethereum in 2020 at $3,000. Your product base may not have changed, but your scalability of your capital has multiplied by, call it like 30x. And so that's a very significant shift that we expect to see. And for the right digital asset treasury company with the right asset base and the right product lines, it's an incredible opportunity for upside growth.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a pretty good way to synthesize all of that, and I guess there's two different kind of numbers to tie out from that. 3,000 divided by 80 is 37x. The Solana numbers and like FDV always tricky to kind of tease out what things are, especially when you're dealing with buy and burns here. But I think that that would also be somewhat of I don't know, a 5x if I'm looking at kind of market caps just on my computer right here. So I mean, I guess there's still numbers to tease out there, but I think I also don't want to corner you into being, hey, there's a 10x here in Hyperliquid or something like that still on the table. But those numbers seem to be the midpoint of what you're talking about here.
I think the math checks out, Zach.
The other piece too, as we look at all this, is DAT specifically. This is what I opened with. Like when you have ETFs coming to market, and we saw that with Solana, and certainly kind of a lot of Solana DAT front running. I had always figured those would kind of face some weakness as the ETFs got off the ground. That did play out, and you could make the argument that it was somewhat due to maybe just enthusiasm waning. I think it might have more to do with just kind of investors trying to access these. Specifically for you guys, though, your guys' shareholder letter kind of only came out a few weeks ago, kind of laying out all the changes as you guys took over the publicly traded company Inova. And so when it comes to what you are looking forward to now, I'm looking at shares. They don't really seem to be moving in the same direction right now as Hyperliquid. Is there anything specific to know about your guys' like public entity structure that might be distinct from what we saw with a lot of the DATs last year with Ethereum that kind of had these huge rallies, fall back to earth moments? Like what's kind of, I guess, distinct about Hyperion on that front?
Yeah, so a few things that I'd mentioned. We've got a really, really clean cap table. The $50 billion pipe was effectively from a singular entity that were my personal mentors and advisors during my time at Dharma. So super long-term aligned. I think it changes the way that the share registration occurs, and in terms of the beneficial ownership limits, right? It's not going to be the same thing where you saw with a lot of the digital asset treasuries, many different entities on the cap table that are all looking to unwind, especially with kind of where things have gone with most other digital asset treasuries. So I would say that's the primary consideration. And then on the other side of that is, pretty simply put, we are the only ones that are building real businesses on chain. And we are doing this in a very young ecosystem. And so everyone has the opportunity to grow very significantly. And that's what we are working every day to capture. I've built different ecosystems before. I know what it takes. I know how important it is to work with other builders in that ecosystem. So not just Hyperliquid Labs, but also teams like Kinetic, Risk, Felix, and so forth, right? All of these teams are very nascent and very young in terms of how early they are in terms of what they can become in the long future. I think a lot about early protocols in Ethereum like Aave, Uniswap, and Curve, and being sub $100 million protocols and absolutely exploding in value with the growth of Ethereum. So we see that same thing happening on Hyperliquid, and Hyperion's job is to work hard every day to really build these strong long-term relationships to not only innovate our own products and build infrastructure that not only we, but other institutional partners will eventually use. And that momentum, that utilization, and that velocity will enable these products to grow and become more robust and
Yeah.
ultimately become the blockchain to house all of finance. Jeff says it's a lot, but it's not just about the core team. It's every single team that's building on Hyperliquid that'll make it probably be one of the most successful blockchain products that we see over the next few years.
Yeah, and obviously, again, I think it's been interesting to kind of see the pivots playing out in the Ethereum space right now around, alignment and Vitalik trying to get people to kind of shift in the L2 roadmap back to L1. It's not something that is easy to do, but having that alignment around, a project that's growing as quickly as Hyperliquid, I think is fairly important. But lastly, I guess when we talk about the other elements here, let me play devil's advocate because we keep hearing it from some people who might be building kind of more centralized perp dexes and the like. Perp exposure for investors. The idea of maybe being able to do the same things you could do on Hyperliquid elsewhere. And one of those things that people keep raising is kind of this fear around regulation and how that could swing. Obviously, here in the U.S., we're going to see what plays out. But the idea of having someone more strict with crypto, how do those risks maybe stack up when you're talking to investors who might say, "Hey, Hyperliquid's this thing over there in unregulated territory as a DEX." Why would that succeed when we have centralized players here, Architect, and a few others who are now trying to implement the perpetual future into traditional markets?
Yeah, really, really important question, and something that we think about a lot at Hyperion, right? So there's a few different variables to it. Hyperliquid Foundation, Chris Giancarlo, 13th chair of the CFTC, obviously works with them. They wrote an open letter to the CFTC about the value of perpetuals and why it should be under CFTC jurisdiction. I think that's really critical. I think that there are the right kind of entities at the White House involved advocating for perpetuals in the United States. Lighter is very vocal about being a U.S. based company. They're backed by Coinbase and Robinhood, so we think that there's a multitude of signals that suggest that perpetuals will eventually be legalized in the United States. At least that's our hope. But like to speak to Hyperliquid directly, right? As a layer one blockchain, all of its infrastructure is permissionless. It is just the perpetuals component that is not legal in the US and that is geo restricted. And so we believe that everyone involved is taking the right steps to get clarity before that occurs. But the other thing that we've seen, and I just got back from CFC St. Moritz, where there's a ton of institutional participants, right? And we spoke earlier about Ripple Prime offering Hyperliquid to institutional clients, is those that see the value or the opportunity in Hyperliquid as a venue today, whether that's using it for purely the perpetuals exchange, the infrastructure, or the arbitrage opportunities between different asset classes, not just on Hyperliquid's various HIP3 markets, but between Hyperliquid and other venues, and what will eventually become as more and more players and retail become users of Hyperliquid. It's almost too good of an opportunity to not participate in. So we are very closely watching to see how the regulatory landscape evolves, but we believe that Hyperliquid has done all the right things to position itself for whatever the outcome may be. And so Hyperion itself is also advocating very strongly for the usability and general access of Hyperliquid, and we will continue to help build products that enable it to be accessible for a global user base.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the distinction there between kind of what's available for U.S. users as of right now and everything that is still kind of able to be used elsewhere, they're kind of different markets to look at, I suppose, as well. But interesting to see all the regulatory pieces fall into place. Lastly, Hyunsu, as we kind of talk about this little celebration of the top crypto projects that we've been putting on here at Coinage, we always kind of give our guests the last word to give the strong pitch, as you kind of already have. You've already done a very good job. But everyone's going to be able to vote at Coinage.media and through our snapshot here using our creator coin Coinage, and then also Coinage NFTs, or if you're a holder of the BAT token from our friends at Brave, also invited to vote here. But I guess the last thing is just kind of the strongest point that you see for 2026, why Hyperliquid should be Crypto Project of the Year as we tally up all these votes.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I would just say the best is yet to come. We envision a world where when you can have a full stack financial service suite on Hyperliquid, so not just directional exposure to crypto with perpetuals instruments, but now equities, commodities, FX, predictions or outcome-based markets, and of course the Hyper EVM and all of the financial services built on those smart contract applications, you're going to be able to move money and take positions in so many unique ways, and it is just not possible on anything that it exists today. And the point that adds on to it quite a bit is in my shareholder letter, I talked about two mega trends. One is tokenization. Obviously, Hyperliquid is capturing quite a bit of that. And the second one is artificial intelligence. So a world where non-human users are going to be operating on chain and serving or managing financial services for individual users. I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow, but that is going to eventually happen. It's very clear what the trend is. And we think blockchain-based Rails is the best conduit for that. So I think Hyperliquid has a massively larger total addressable market than just all the global users that exist today. We think it gets a lot bigger, the pie gets a lot bigger, and it also creates a huge opportunity for Hyperion to build infrastructure that new users will be able to access. So that's a twofer, and we're super excited for 2026.
And
Yeah.
I think, we'll see how the voting plays out. And obviously, this will open up soon. So if you're watching this, everyone can head to Coinage.media to participate here. But I think, we could have a whole episode just dedicated to the agents and agentic finance and where that's all going too. So I think it's a theme that's come up with a few of our other interviews, and we'll see what happens in the votes. But Hyunsu, can't thank you enough for coming on, man. I appreciate the time, and good luck with everything in the Hyperliquid ecosystem and with Hyperion as well, the CEO of Hyperion DeFi. Thanks again, man.
Thank you so much, Zach. Thank you, Coinage, and I hope to see you guys again soon.